The Palestinian militant group Hamas says it has chosen its top military commander in Gaza as its new political leader. Yahya Sinwar replaces Ismail Haniyeh, who was assassinated in Iran last week in an attack blamed on Israel. Israel believes Sinwar masterminded the October 7th terror attacks and has been pursuing him ever since. We can speak to our correspondent, Rebecca Ritters, joining me now from Jerusalem. Rebecca, good morning. Will this appointment of Sinwar change anything in Hamas's strategy?
Well, I think that's very unlikely, Claire. We're not likely to see any major changes. If anything, this could see the Hamas approach become more hardline. Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza, has certainly been the more hardline leader from the Hamas leadership. And with the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, who was seen as if not more moderate, then certainly more pragmatic leader. And this appointment of Sinwar as the central, now really the most powerful man in the Hamas leadership, I think that we're likely to see a more hardline approach, if anything. But though, the reason I say we may not see much difference at all is Yahya Sinwar was already largely seen as to coin a term, the supreme leader of Hamas anyway. He was certainly, since October 7, the go-to person for the final word on all things from strategy to the ceasefire negotiations. It's certainly seen as the head of the snake, certainly within Hamas and externally. So it's unlikely that we'll see any kind of major changes there. We are now seeing a centralization of that power and a formalization of that centralization of power, if you will, but unlikely that we'll see anything in terms of a different political or military strategy.
Yeah, tell us more about what this means for a possible ceasefire in Gaza. Will this have implications or for the release of Israeli hostages held captive by Hamas?
Well, as I was just trying to say, I think it certainly will have implications when it comes to the ceasefire deal, but I think it's not surprising that ever since we saw the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, basically pundits within Israel have been saying that the ceasefire arrangement is effectively dead in the water. That, now with Sinwar definitely elected as the central and most powerful figure in Hamas, I think it's unlikely that we will see any kind of hostage negotiation or ceasefire deal in the near future. The US, of course, saying that a political solution is still possible and it is still the best way to calm tensions in the region. But I think it's very unlikely that we're going to see any kind of agreement between Hamas and Israel. Though we know that Israel says that for its part, it's still open to negotiations. I think with now this centralization of power and certainly with Sinwar now being officially the head of the snake, I think it's unlikely that we're going to see any negotiations reach a successful end anytime soon.
And has there been any other reaction from Israel to this new leadership? Is it more or less what you would expect?
Well, this appointment is certainly being viewed as a signal or as a kind of message of strength and of defiance towards Israel. Yahya Sinwar has already been on top of Israel's kill list, if you will, for some time, certainly since October 7th. They have said they are going after the Hamas leadership and that they will not stop until they are taken down. We heard from the Israeli military spokesman, Daniel Hagari, in the aftermath of this news, saying the only place for Yahya Sinwar is next to Daif, referring to Mohammed Daif, the military leader of Hamas who was killed in an Israeli airstrike in July, and the rest of the October 7 terrorists. So certainly feeling the sentiment there. And we also heard from Israeli Katz, the Israeli foreign minister, saying another reason to eliminate him and the vile organisation from this earth. So, Israel certainly not changing its tune. In fact, becoming stronger behind its will to eliminate the leaders of Hamas.
Rebecca, thank you. That is Rebecca Ritters for us in Jerusalem.
Now, 10 months have passed since the Hamas terror attacks on Israel last October, which precipitated the ongoing war in Gaza. The October the 7th attacks began when militants infiltrated southern Israel from the Gaza Strip, killed some 1,200 people and took around 250 hostages back to Gaza. Israel's subsequent military campaign and its stated goal of destroying Hamas has killed 39,677 Palestinians to this day. Now, that's according to the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza that's run by Hamas. Thousands more are reported missing between the rubble and are presumed dead. Now, as the conflict enters its 11th month, fears of an all-out regional war are growing. At the request of Iran, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation is holding an emergency meeting in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The meeting will focus on the situation following the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran last week. Meanwhile, the US is trying to prevent the conflict from spiralling into a major war. Secretary of State Antony Blinkens called on both sides, Iran and Israel, to de-escalate. Let's take a listen.
We continue to work intensely to de-escalate tensions in the Middle East and to prevent the spread of conflict. Over the past few days, we've been in constant contact with partners in the region and well beyond. In those conversations, we've heard a clear consensus. No one should escalate this conflict. We've been engaged in intense diplomacy with allies and partners, communicating that message directly to Iran. We communicated that message directly to Israel.
We can get more from DW Middle East analyst Shani Rozanes, who's here in the studio with me. Good to see you, Shani, as always. Now, we're hearing Antony Blinkens saying that the US is communicating directly with Israel, directly with Iran, over the tensions in the region that we're seeing right now. What do we know? What more do we know about these direct US-Iran contacts?
Well, I'm not sure how. I mean, it could be that I would probably that they're somewhat indirect. I mean, the Americans have been in touch, despite everything, with Iran before October 7th and ever since October 7th, but never through direct channels. There have been reports about talks going through Oman, for example, in May, which they officially denied. But there is no doubt that there is a channel of communication there. The Iranians seem to be still on the fence whether, on how they're going to respond. And the Americans are trying to use this time that they have to try, and put some pressure and maybe get the Iranians to understand they will back Israel very strongly and firmly in case of, suspected escalation, and maybe trying to incentivize Iran in a way, sort of like not just sticks, but also offering carrots in order to bring all of this, assumed or expected escalation down, or prevent it rather. So this is what we're seeing on one hand, and at the same time, the Americans are sending their carriers into the Mediterranean to support Israel. We know that the commander of CENTCOM, the central commander for the Americans, has been in Israel, General Kurilla. So they're doing both of this, sort of trying to show strong, alliance with in Israel with its defense, but at the same time, in secret channels to sort of maybe just avoid the whole, scenario of escalation that is expected to come. Maybe that would be the best way, prevention rather than just deterrence.
Mm-hmm. So we're seeing this meeting today, aren't we? The Organization of Islamic Cooperation meeting. It's happening in Jeddah today. Is Iran likely to find support there?
Probably. I mean, what we've been seeing in the last week since the assassination of Haniyeh in Tehran is that even the countries that are considered to be the moderate Sunni countries, like for example, Saudi Arabia, who was on the verge of signing, a normalization deal with Israel. The same thing with Jordan, that has a peace agreement with Israel and is a very strategic neighbor, for Israel. They've been distancing themselves for Israel, saying, to both sides, and we know they have had some role in helping the interception of the previous attack from Iran on Israel in April. They've been saying, we don't want none of it. You don't use our airspace. We don't want to be included. And more than that, and this is basically a slap in the face for Israel, sort of turning the back to Israel, saying, we don't want to be part of this, partially because they're seeing how the war is ongoing, and partially also because this is all connected to the assassination of a very prominent Palestinian leader, Ismail Haniyeh. Hamas is known as as a terrorist organization in many places, but for Palestinians, many of them live in Jordan, many of them in the region, he was a symbol, he was a hero. Seeing their government support any act standing with Israel, for not being punished for that, that's a bit of a, more problematic stand for them to take.
10 months after the October the 7th attacks, would you say Israel and Hamas are closer to what they originally wanted?
It's unbelievable. It's been 10 months. I don't think, Israelis have expected after 10 months to be where they are, still so deep into Gaza, far from any conclusion, in the near sight. I think, to use Churchill's famous speech, we are probably, if you listen very carefully to Netanyahu, this is maybe the end of the beginning, but not the beginning of the end. Netanyahu seems to be very adamant in going forward, pushing very much strongly. And in a way, Hamas is seeing in the last week some of his, wildest dreams coming true. Since the beginning of, since October, Hamas was wishing for more and more fronts to be opened against Israel, with Lebanon, with Hezbollah, with Iran, in the West Bank, wishing for escalation. And it could be that we're on the verge of that, which would be for Hamas the best case scenario. So, 10 months in, I'm afraid we're just not anywhere close to seeing an end to this in sight, unfortunately.
DW's Middle East analyst, Shani Rozanes. Shani, thank you.
You're welcome, Anya.